Welcome. My name is Brian Moore, and I will be your narrator for this informative presentation. Today, I'll be discussing the LGBTQ plus history of Scotland, and basically all that encompasses the history. And this will be for my Scotland, the Land and People class. I'm basically going to start off defining the LGBTQ plus community. For those that don't know, the LGBTQ in LGBTQ plus community is an acronym for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and the Q can stand for either queer or questioning. For those that don't know, queer could probably be defined for people that might be genderqueer, like in between, or they're just confused. Questioning is also common because we have a lot of people that might not know where they fall on their sexuality or their gender. Recent studies have actually shown that gender and sexuality are on a spectrum, and many people can fall anywhere on the spectrum. Maybe you are you don't feel 100% male or 100% female. You might be somewhere in the middle, or you might be kind of like 80% male and maybe have some, you don't identify fully as male or fully as female. You might fall in the between. You might be gender fluid. And that's kind of where the plus in the LGBTQ plus community encompasses all the others that can be included in the community. Since the community is so progressive and so inclusive, it really can encompass so many new different types of people that can fall under this umbrella community. So the plus in the community really can be applicable for gender fluid people, intersex people, asexuals, demisexuals, pansexuals. And if you don't know what that means, I would definitely encourage you to do some further research, because it can be very interesting, especially with how wide the spectrum really is. And to the left on this presentation slide, you'll also see the LGBTQ plus flag, which is a rainbow flag. Each color actually has its own significance, and you'll see certain flags in certain areas have different significances. But generally, worldwide, the rainbow flag is used as a symbol of kind of like welcoming, and like a safe zone for LGBT people across the globe. If you're in a neighborhood or a cafe that has a rainbow flag, usually you can tell that they are an LGBT-friendly business or just place to go for safety. But moving on from defining the LGBTQ plus community, we're going to move on a little bit more into the history in Scotland. Although Scotland is now very progressive for LGBTQ people, they once weren't that way. It was actually illegal to be gay in Scotland. Homosexuality among men was illegal in Scotland until 1980. And it's a little bit weird because they really kind of focused on the men, but however, same-sex contact for women was never persecuted against because the Scottish did not see homosexuality among women as an issue, which has kind of, it's a bit biased. Men were actually imprisoned in Scotland for a long time for homosexual contact if they were found caught having homosexual contact with anyone. And moving on from this, though, the fight for equality in Scotland started off a bit early, but it's a little odd because they weren't as progressive as they were today, as I already mentioned, because they were a little bit behind compared to England and Wales. England and Wales, their counterparts in the UK, actually can now mark 50 years on this year of legalizing homosexuality between two men in private for those over 21 years of age and older. And Scotland actually didn't legalize in the same manner until 13 years later. And the reason for that is because they had a great influence and resistance from the Scottish Church, the Civic Society of Scotland, and the Scotland criminal justice system overall. As I said before, you had a number of men in prison for homosexuality, so I think a lot of people that kind of weren't catching up with the societal change that was happening maybe in their counterparts in England and Wales, it just didn't catch on, I guess, in Scotland. And I think the Scottish Church really had a lot to do with that. I think they have a great influence on the people of Scotland, and that's kind of why it took them 13 years later to make this change. But it was actually the work of the Scottish Minorities Group and Parliament members like Robin Cook, who is featured in the photo to the right, that led the change in Scotland to decriminalize homosexuality, at least between men. So the law of Scotland for homosexuality was leveled out after the Scottish Minorities Group took their case to the European Court of Human Rights, which ended with a positive law change in their favor. And to the right, you'll actually see a pin for the Scottish Minorities Group. and they were based out of Glasgow in Scotland. But the Scottish Minorities Group was later renamed the Scottish Homosexual Rights Group. The reason that they weren't that original name, even though that was their main focus as an activist group, the original name was basically used to avoid explicit reference to homosexuality, because at that time it was very controversial to talk about homosexuals in Scotland. Now that it basically was decriminalized, we can move on talking about marriage equality. So in February 2014, the Scottish Parliament convened and passed the Marriage and Civil Partnership Bill that allowed same-sex couples to be married under Scottish law, which I guess is a little bit different, and I found interesting because in the United States we had the Supreme Court decision that kind of made this decision, and it was interesting to see that they did it through a bill that they passed basically kind of in their parliament for what they did. And another interesting fact about the marriage bill is that it was brought to their government after a government consultation regarding same-sex marriage received 77,508 responses, which I find insane, because it basically, what they meant by government consultation is that it's a part of their government website where they can actually, Scottish citizens, can actually go on their website and advocate for issues that they believe should be important and should be important to their government. So this was actually one of the petitions that garnered 77,000 signatures, which for them was actually kind of groundbreaking and never been done before. But the bill thankfully passed, even though the two main churches in Scotland did not approve of it. But the Parliament of Scotland felt that the bill was the right thing to do for the Scotland community. And happy picture to the right, you can actually say that one of the first same-sex Scottish couples was married under the new law on the day that it was passed. And this is actually a fun fact, that this couple to the right was actually in a civil union. That was kind of what happened before marriage equality came along. They were in a civil union, similar to how in the United States we had civil unions that gave couples similar rights, but it wasn't actually all the rights that marriage held on both the federal and state level for us in America. I'm assuming that in Scotland it would be a similar way, that they weren't getting all the rights that they were guaranteed for their heterosexual counterparts, But, and there was a lot of important measures on the bill that were very interesting, and I felt something that I kind of wish that in America we could have had. This is just a small list of a couple of the important measures that I found to be very both progressive and needed on a wide governmental scale, like Scotland is doing right now. And I would like to see some points on this bill integrated into American law as well. But some of the important measures that were included in the bill were, first and foremost, they amended the guidance on teaching about gay marriage in Scottish schools. I find that very important and very essential. I feel in the United States we're not very progressive with our education, and we kind of lack an education for the LGBT community. The LGBTQ community is definitely lacking in education across the board for our history and sex education as well in school and public schools. But moving on to the second point of the bill, they also were allowing religious bodies to perform same-sex marriages, but not forcing them to do so. Religious institutions can deny same-sex couples of holding their wedding inside a church if they do so, but no one can be persecuted against if they are a minister that chooses to officiate marriages. And this third point, which I found to be very, very progressive of Scotland, and something that truly shows that they are one of the most LGBT-friendly nations to do this in 2014, honestly, is amazing, is that they were allowing transgender people to stay married rather than having to get divorced when obtaining a gender recognition certificate. This is just really progressive, and definitely is something that a lot of people don't have to face if you're a cisgender person, which if you don't know, a cisgender person is someone that feels comfortable with the gender, if they feel that their gender and sex that was assigned at birth are aligned, and that they don't feel that they just feel comfortable in their body, is basically what cisgender means. For them to allow transgender people to do this is leaps and bounds ahead of what many nations compared to the world are doing for the LGBTQ community. And the last point that I included was an intention to recognize same-sex marriages registered anywhere else in the UK or abroad. That's an awesome little detail to definitely put in there, and will definitely attract some tourism for them from LGBT couples because they will feel safe and know that their marriage is recognized abroad. And the fun fact about the Scotland marriage bill is that it came into effect on December 16th, 2014, which is awesome. And moving on to that, a little bit about the fight for LGBTQ equality in Scotland today. Scotland, as I said, is a country that prides itself on their overall acceptance on sexuality and gender identity within their borders compared to other countries in Europe. And Scotland actually has been rated as the #1 LGBT-friendly country throughout all of Europe, which is awesome. And I look forward to hopefully visiting Scotland one day because I had no idea they were the most LGBT-friendly country in all of Europe. But back to a little bit about the fight for equality on Scotland. They are doing great, obviously, as I have said, but however, the fight for transgender intersex rights continues on in Scotland and Europe overall. The next progression in LGBT rights will be seen by reviewing and reforming gender recognition law to match the international best practices. And many in Scotland still face discrimination as members of the LGBTQ community, and we must continue to raise awareness and recognition against those discriminatory behaviors. But like I said, overall, Scotland is very, very LGBT friendly, and even just today, they're still fighting and still hoping to do better. So that's always something to aspire towards as a country. And also to the left, you'll also see that we have the transgender pride flag. And if you have a chance, research what the colors mean for this as well, because they're all very inclusive of, mainly if you're curious, I'm sure you can deduce what the pink and blue mean, but what the white means in the middle is very important to that community. And moving on, I included this last side because I am a hospitality and tourism management major, and I thought LGBT tourism is always something interesting to look in towards, and traveling to Scotland should always be an option for all people, and it's exciting to see that LGBT people are so welcomed in the community of Scotland. But back to the slide, with Scotland being a top LGBT-friendly country, they've definitely grown as an attractive LGBT vacation spot. Scotland celebrates their LGBT History Month every February with a myriad of events to attend in numerous cities. And every June, Scotland holds Pride Scotia. It's basically their gay pride parade, similar to like a big one in New York, but they have theirs in their capital, Edinburgh, and it includes a parade, barbecue, community fair, and more. And to the right, you'll actually see students from the University of Edinburgh enjoying 2014's Pride Scotia, which I'm assuming was probably a great one as they were about to have homosexual marriage legalized. So look at all their happy faces and full of pride. And just a list of cities that offer tourist accommodations and attractions catered to the LGBT community. Those cities would include Edinburgh, Glasgow, Aberdeen, Dundee, and Stirling as kind of a top 5. But when I was researching, it actually kind of stunned me because they had all these listed about accommodations, like and a list of hotels that they knew were LGBT friendly and could guarantee that they were friendly. But they said that overall that most LGBT people don't see any problems gaining any accommodations or any problems when they're abroad in Scotland, and they actually have a very progressive tourism page that includes the LGBT community widely. Overall, just to conclude, I found that Scotland was definitely an ally to the LGBT community and very progressive compared to a lot of nations that, a lot of first world nations that are out there and that are still very discriminatory and biased against the LGBT community. And myself, I can't wait to go visit Scotland at some point now just to see the gay community and see how it differs from our own American LGBT community. And overall, it's just a great place to visit, and I enjoyed studying Scotland's LGBTQ community. And I thank you for your time.